Revving your car's engine can actually make it run better. Now, I'm not talking about sitting in your car with it just idling and then you rev the engine up and rev the engine up like you're going to do a burnout or something. That's not good for your engine. What I'm talking about is driving it at higher speeds for extended periods of time. In the olden days, we used to call it an Italian tune-up. We old mechanics still call it an Italian tune-up. And for those of you who've never heard of it, an Italian tune-up is driving your car fast on the highway for a while to clean everything out. Now here in Texas it's easy to do because between San Antonio and El Paso there's a stretch of highway that goes 544 miles and the speed limit is 80 miles an hour. Now you don't need to go that fast as long as you do it for an extended period of time. I find anything from an hour to 2 hours driving at that speed really helps clean your engine out, makes your vehicle run better. Now generally you're not going to pay a mechanic like me to drive your car on the highway for a couple of hours since it's $100-something an hour. And anyway, I'm still 3.5 hours from San Antonio, so it'd be a long drive. I do it using the pressure cleaning system. Here's the canister. It unscrews. The cleaner goes inside here. Then you put the top back on. Whee! Hanging on the hood like an IV drip at a hospital. Hook the feed end up to the fuel injection system. In this case, you bolt it onto the fuel rail because Toyotas don't have any kind of a Schrader valve where you can screw a Schrader assembly on. You have to hook it up to the fuel rail. Then I get my air pressure line from the compressor and hook it up. And in this case, I like cleaning them the fastest and the best. So what I do is, I pull out the fuel pump fuse so the fuel pump doesn't run, and then with the pressured air here, that pushes the cleaner into the fuel injectors, and it's running on 100% fuel injector cleaner. And that's where a system like this works a lot better than you pouring cleaner in a gas tank. Because if you pour cleaner in a gas tank, it's all diluted, it's only going to work so much. With 100% cleaner, you'll do a better job cleaning all the carbon out of the engine. Now odds are, you're not going to have an air compressor, you're not going to buy this pressure system and a cleaner and do something like this. But when you do go on the highway and drive, say, 70 miles an hour for an hour and a half, a couple hours, steady speed going somewhere, that will help clean out your engine and make it run better. Especially for people that do a lot of stop and go city driving and don't do anything else. I've got elderly customers here, grannies, who are still driving, and they say they never go more than 30 miles an hour. Now that's not good for a car because the engine isn't spinning fast enough. And to add insult to injury, if you're only taking short trips like 3 miles to the grocery store and back, the engine isn't even reaching operating temperature for very long, so things can get clogged up inside the engine. Now you have to understand that no machine is perfect. When you burn gasoline, that's hydrogen and carbon basically, in Earth's atmosphere, that's nitrogen and oxygen and trace elements, you get all kinds of end results from the burning of it at high pressure inside the engine. Now the piston rings are supposed to seal all that mixture from going into the crankcase where the engine oil is and then just blow it out the exhaust, but of course no machine is perfectly efficient. So some of these gases and byproducts, especially water vapor, which when you burn gasoline it gives off a lot of water vapor. That's why you see them steaming in the winter when it's cold outside out of your exhaust. Carbon gets created. A lot of that will blow by the piston rings. Even in a new car, nothing seals perfectly. That's why the oil gets dirty, and if you smell it, you'll smell it smells different when it's been there in a while because there's generally a little bit of gasoline dilution that got in it. And no valve seals for the valves are perfect, so gases and oil get sucked into the engine. Nothing seals perfectly, and if you don't drive at high speeds to evaporate all this stuff, especially for longer periods of time, you'll get a buildup of water and different things in the oil, and you get a carbon buildup on the engine because it's idling so low that it doesn't go fast enough to really burn everything off. In this respect, cars are kind of like racehorses. They like running fast every once in a while. You don't want your racehorse car to turn into a big old fat horse lying in the field eating all the time and not exercising. You want to keep it lean and mean. And when you're driving at higher speeds on a highway, everything's heating up, and you might not think it, but gasoline itself is a very good cleaner for your engine going fast, that gasoline burning through it fast and getting nice and hot, that's often just the ticket for a car that isn't running perfectly. As an example, we used to have a Toyota Camry station wagon. My wife was a teacher at Houston Independent School District, and she'd drive back and forth to work in it. And I mean, it was only 2 miles from here, so it was a 4-mile round trip. And I mean, it was a Camry, so it ran decently, but we decided we were going to see the Alamo in San Antonio. So we drove to San Antonio and back, and that's about a 3.5-hour trip each way. So we're zooming along the highway. We couldn't go 80 because the top speed was 70 going out to San Antonio. You had to go past San Antonio to get 80, but we were doing 70, 75 the whole time, there and back to Houston. And this was all done in the course of one day. Here in Texas, people like driving. The next week, when my wife's driving a car to work, she said, "What'd you do to my Camry? Boy, it's running so much smoother. It's idling so much smoother. It has more acceleration." So I told her, I said, "Well, you know, we just went to San Antonio and I was driving 70, 75. We did an Italian tune-up on the car while we were driving it." Now, granted, if you're the type of person that drives your cars hard a lot and are on the highway all the time, hey, you don't need to do this. You're already doing it. But the vast majority of people these days, especially here in Houston, they do a lot of stop and go city driving, and when they do get on the highway, they do a lot of stop and go highway driving because there's gridlock here all the time, especially during rush hour. So it's actually worse if they drive from Houston, say, to Humble, and they're going 35 miles, they might only be going 5 miles an hour doing that. So that's even worse than stop and go city driving because it's mainly stop driving and not too much go. Now, as I say, as a mechanic, I don't have time to do that to other people's cars. You do it to your own car. I use this pressurized fuel injection cleaning system, and it does a pretty good job, but I mean, you gotta buy it, you gotta have an air compressor, you gotta buy the cleaner, you gotta really know what you're doing. Because these cleaning systems use strong chemicals, you gotta know which ones to use. And even then, often, it will trip a check engine light because it's running with pure cleaner, and a lot of times, that'll make the engine seem to be not running correctly. It'll trip a code for the computer. I have to reset all that after I'm done cleaning it, and this takes about an hour to do. Where if you're just going to go on a trip and take your car on the highway, hey, you don't have to mess with wondering which chemicals are correct to put in your gas tank or to try to inject into the engine. You can just drive the car at a good rate of speed, and it'll clean itself while you're driving down the road. Now, of course, be logical when you can do that. If your oil's all dirty, change your oil and filter before you do it, because then it'll have a better ability to clean everything out. Especially if you got an older car that's somewhat worn. When you put the clean oil in and do that driving, you might find that after you do check your oil, it might be getting dirty already, which is a good thing, because that means the detergent in the new oil is collecting the dirt and stuff that's in the engine. And if your car was really messed up and you changed the oil and filter and it got real dirty quick after doing it, then of course you would change the oil and filter again to have clean oil inside. All modern oils are called detergent oils because they have detergents in them that help clean things up. And what the detergent does is it keeps the crud in suspension. So when you change the oil, the crud goes out with the dirty oil and doesn't build up pockets of sludge like it did when I was a younger mechanic. And engines would just be full of sludge because they had non-detergent oil, and the sludge would just build up everywhere because the oil wouldn't pick it up and carry it around. So if you're hankering to do an Italian tune-up driving on the highway for a couple hours, hey, first make sure the oil filter's clean, make sure your air filter's clean, make sure your spark plugs aren't all worn out, because you want to do this with an engine that's already set up for a tip-top run. Because if you've got an engine that's got bad spark plugs, dirty oil, a clogged air filter, an Italian tune-up is not going to fix your problems, because it's never going to run right during the Italian tune-up on a highway, so it's really not going to fix anything. Now, the whole idea of Italian tune-up is proven by the guys in those big rigs, the 18-wheelers. Generally, most of their driving, the interstate ones especially, is on highways going at highway speeds. That's how those engines can run good, and sometimes they can go 1,000,000 miles. All the wear and tear that happens in stop and go city driving doesn't happen on highway speeds. The engine's cleaning itself out, and of course those guys have a bigger advantage than most people in gasoline cars. They're all diesel engines. Well, diesel fuel itself is pretty much of a lubricant. If you take gasoline, pour it on your fingers, you'll feel that it can clean crud off. Pour diesel fuel on, you'll see it's slimy because it's got more lubricant qualities. So diesel engines, hey, they're even better for going long distances because their diesel fuel is a lubricant, which is yet another reason that diesel engines can change their oil less frequently. Because if gasoline gets into your engine oil, even small amounts, that reduces the lubricant qualities. Where diesel fuel, it's a lubricant in itself. An Italian tune-up of revving your engine up higher on the highway, driving it for a certain period of time, can actually do wonders for how well your car idles and accelerates. And you can do sort of an Italian tune-up locally if you want. Just keep your car in lower gears. Let's say you're going 70 miles an hour on a highway, look at the RPM, say it's doing 3,000 RPMs. You could drive in town and put it in a lower gear. So even though you're going 30 or 35 miles an hour, you can set it up so your transmission is going 3,000 RPMs, and it's doing basically the same thing. Then it's making the engine spin faster, it's cleaning all the stuff out. It's actually better on a highway because then you got more wind. But, I mean, in a pinch, you can help it out somewhat by putting it at higher RPMs when you're just driving in town. A radical new motor oil that's very important for people that have cars with the modern engines in them. The new oil is going to be called GF6, and it's really important for people with those GDI, variable valve timing engines that a lot of modern cars have, the little 4-cylinder engines that put out as much horsepower as a V8. Take the Hondas. They've had a problem with oil dilution, where gasoline was getting past the piston rings, past the lubrication, and diluting the engine oil, which leads to engine damage. And other GDI engines have had carbon buildup, timing chain problems where the timing chains wear out prematurely. Well, that's what this GF6 oil is made for. Make sure you look at the label on a can of oil, because the label explains it all. As you can see on my bottle of Castrol here that I use in this old car, you go by the service label. This says API Service SN. SN, SM, SL, and SJ. How the quality of the oil fits your engine. And you want to research your own engine to see what you're supposed to use. GF6A and GF6B. And here's the difference between those two. The GF6A is going to be backwards compatible, so you can use it for any vehicle. That's what they're going to say you should really run your cars on, so they pollute less, have less engine wears. That'll be the GF6A. And the GF6B, that's going to be only for those modern engines that need the 0W16 oil, which in itself is hard enough to find these days because that is a relatively new oil, and a lot of stores don't even sell the stuff. Now, this new GF6 oil has to meet 8 new parameters that the old oil didn't meet. The first one, sequence 3H, requires that the oil be 33% better, stopping oxidation and deposits in the engine. This is especially for those GDI engines that build up deposits more. Then it has to meet sequence 4B, which means it has to have improved valve train wear so the valves and the cams and everything don't wear out too early. And it has to meet sequence 5, reduces varnish and sludge inside the engine. Now this is very important, and of course it's historically important too. On the early engines, they just used oil had lying around, and after it got dirty, it would build sludge in the engine to destroy it. So then later they came with detergent oils. The detergent oils contain detergent, which keeps all the sludge in suspension. So rather than clog stuff up, it gets in the oil and floats around, and then when you change the dirty oil, the sludge goes out with the dirty oil. This is just a further improvement of it to keep sludge and varnish from building up. Varnish is the real big problem in these GDI engines. They have a tendency of running hotter with all that pressure and turbochargers throwing stuff in, so it has to meet that specification. Then the new GF6 oil has to meet fuel requirements so that they get better fuel economy. It requires 19 to 39% better fuel economy. The less viscosity, the less friction it is. That's why they've gone to 0W16. Sequence 6F, which is another fuel economy thing. It requires that these oils meet a certain minimum fuel economy in a test. Then there's sequence 8, another test, that requires that these oils do less corrosion, that they keep more corrosion from occurring inside the engine. Then there's a sequence 9 test that it has to meet. Prevents corrosion. It's a test that they've been doing for years, and they're just making the test more stringent for this new oil. And last but not least, there's sequence 10. It says that they have to have less timing chain wear, which is a big deal in these little bitty engines that put out a lot of horsepower. The engines are spinning faster and faster. Generally, they have at least 2 overhead cams, if not 4, that have variable valve timing. You do not want chain wear to wear out earlier. Now, when I was a young mechanic, the timing chains generally lasted as long as the engines did, unless you went 300,000 miles and it finally wore out. They were bigger, thicker chains. Check out this old Chevy timing chain. It's thick, it's strong. The new ones are tiny compared to these, so they need more protection. Plus, they're also spinning faster. So really, why are they making this new specifications, GF6A and 6B? The oil has to evolve, just like it did in the past. Originally, cars used oil that would sludge up. Then they made detergent oil. But even then, most of the cars didn't even have oil filters to filter stuff out. We had a Ford, didn't have an oil filter on. It was a Ford Fairlane, had no oil filter. We would just change the oil in it every 1,000 miles. Then they added oil filters, started making various different viscosities for different usages. They're upping the ante again and making an oil that really is much higher quality than the old stuff was. And it's a real change for the better. I remember they started changing the oil change intervals. And I asked an engineer once, okay, we used to say to change it every 3,000. Now you're saying 5. What's the difference? Well, back then the engineer that I talked to said, well, Scotty, we have to make them more eco-friendly. So we're telling you to change the oil every 5,000 miles now. I said, well, did you change anything? He said, no, we didn't change anything at all, except the mileage we told you to change it. Well, these modern oils, the GF6, they do have a lot of modifications to make them better, having better additives, making the base more pure so they have less wear. Because back when I was a young mechanic, you could rebuild an engine for $200-300 really. But today's modern engines, you'll go anywhere from $3,000 to $20,000 rebuilding some of those fancy quad overhead cam 24 valve. You don't want those engines to wear out prematurely, and coming up with this better type of oil is a good thing. And I suppose, like everything else, when it first comes out, they'll rip everyone off and charge way too much for the oil. But when you consider what an engine costs versus what the oil costs, you're going to be better using this oil than any of those modern engines with GDI, variable valve timing, turbochargers, small 4-cylinder engines that put out a lot of horsepower by revving faster. You want to use this new GF6B oil in those, the ones that require the 0W16 oil. Realize that the GF6B should only be used that call for the 0W16. If they don't, you can use the GF6A because that's backward compatible. Use whatever the manufacturers suggest. A very common problem in modern cars, an oxygen sensor system. Now, all modern cars use a variety of oxygen sensors. Technically, this is an air-fuel ratio sensor. These things screw into the exhaust system, and they measure indirectly what kind of gases are in the exhaust to make the car run perfectly and not pollute. Now, this particular car's got 4 of them on it. In this case, it's tripped a code to check engine light is on. In this case, it's P0051, heated oxygen sensor, heater control circuit low, bank 2 sensor 1. The sensors send feedback to the computer. They can be affected by if your car's running rich, lean, if you got a bad catalytic converter, if you've got bad fuel. There's all kinds of reasons that they can trip codes for just the sensors. This is a Lexus, a Toyota product, and they have a known problem. Inside these stupid little sensors is a heater, kind of like your hairdryer heater. And that's so that when you start the car, immediately it heats up, and it works efficiently at lower operating temperatures when you start the car. And these stupid heaters inside those sensors break down all the time on these. Now, the car can run perfectly fine. This thing's running perfectly fine. But you can't get your car inspected because it's got that code for a problem with the anti-pollution system, the oxygen sensor. So in the case of this Lexus, the most logical thing to do is to just change out that sensor. Now it's called Bank 2 Sensor 1. Well, there's 4 of them on here. How do you know which one that is? Well, here's how you tell on any engine. This is a V8, so there's 2 banks. There's Bank 1 and Bank 2. Well, Bank 1 is the side of the engine that has the number 1 cylinder, and Bank 2 is the opposite side. So in the case of this Lexus, the driver's side has the number 1 cylinder, so bank number 2 is the opposite side, the passenger side. And the code was for Bank 2 Sensor 1. Well, Sensor 1 is the sensor before the catalytic converter. So it's the first one off of the exhaust manifold. Jack it up and see where it is. This thing is so low to the ground. you gotta jack it up to get under it and look at anything. And we don't want to be squashed, so I'll go to the jack stand. Then we go under the car. You'll see, you really can't see anything because all this plastic crap is in the way. So we got to take some of the plastic crap out of the way so we can work on it. So we'll take a bunch of these off. And now when we go up here, we can see the oxygen sensor right there. There's the front one. If we go back past the cat, there's the rear one behind the catalytic converter. But we're changing the front one that's in the front. Now the first thing you have to do is disconnect the clip, and it is a stinker. You got to squeeze and pull. But eventually, as you can see, I've got that end unplugged. It is a real stinker. These are one of the worst design plugs on the planet. I don't know why Toyota makes these. They're absolute scumbags. Yeah, they're real easy to put together because they click on, but they're almost impossible to get off. You just have to keep squeezing and squeezing until they finally click and snap off. Now, when we go back to the other end here where the oxygen sensor is, you need an oxygen sensor remover tool. You'll never get it off otherwise. The tool itself just slips over the sensor. Then it's on there, and you put a ratchet on it. Here's a better shot where you can see it. There's the wrench. And you put a ratchet on that and pull on it. Here's the ratchet with a long arm. Fits on it, and you just... and it comes off. There it is, and once it's loose, you can just get your hand and it'll spin off. You can see it just spins freely. You just keep turning it until it comes off. There it is, we got it out. Then you just get your new oxygen sensor and screw it in the hole. Up it goes. Just screws in by hand, you spin it in, and once it's spinned in, you put the wrench and get it nice and tight. There it is, it's down, inside, in. Now you want to make it tight because you don't want it leaking. And of course, fish the line through here so that you can plug it into the other end and click it in. Now as you can see here, it's a one-hand job clicking it in. There it goes, click. They're very easy to put together. They're hellacious to take apart. Then of course you got to bolt all the stupid plastic crap back on. And voila, we'll just let it down and take it for a road test. Down she goes. And as you can see now, the check engine light is off. All those lights went off. So the next time your car has a problem with the oxygen sensor system, now you know what to do. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.